Okay, we're continuing on Yoma Pei Amud Aleph, 80a, toward the bottom. Having concluded our discussion, having concluded our discussion on the size one needs to, the amount of food one needs to eat to be liable for eating on Yom Kippur, the Mishnah now moves to the amount one is liable for drinking on Yom Kippur. And yesterday, after discussion back and forth, we came to the conclusion that there are 4 different opinions as to how much one requires to drink to be liable. The first is our Mishnah, which is a half a mouthful. That's the halacha, half a mouthful. Then we had Beis Shammai, which said a revius, standardized version. Beis Hillel says almost an actual mouthful. No, sorry, Beis Hillel says also half a mouthful like our Mishnah. Rabbi Huda says almost a mouthful. Rabbi Huda, the name of Rabbi Lezer. And Rabbi Huda ben Meseira says the amount of one gulp. The actual mouthful was a suggested position that was then rejected because it wasn't consistent with the language of our Mishnah. That was what we did. That's essentially what we did yesterday. I want to ask, second to last line. Maskif lo Rav Oishia. Rav Oishia raises the following objection. When the Gemara introduces a question with the word maskif, that means the person questioning is challenging using logical deduction. Rather than quoting another source, that would be Meisei or Rami, whether the source is higher or of equal standing. The maskif means a challenge using logic. So Rav Oishia is challenging as follows. In Cain, if Beis Hillel, when he says mouthful, does not mean an actual mouthful, because that's inconsistent with our Mishnah, or inconsistent with the way Rav Yehuda and the name of Shmuel explained our Mishnah. So therefore, Beis Hillel means a half a mouthful. So now we've reduced the size or the volume of what Beis Hillel says you are liable for drinking Yom Kippur by half. And because we've reduced it by half, we've now made it smaller than Beis Shammai. And if so, okay, and if so, this would then be Beis Hillel being more stringent than Beis Shammai. Because the bigger your volume is, the more lenient you are. Because you're saying, even though you drank this amount, because you haven't drank the full amount, you aren't liable. So if a person drank a half a mouthful, and that half a mouthful is not a revius, which most people probably is not, then that would mean you're liable according to Beis Hillel, but you're not liable according to Beis Shammai. And the Beis Shammai is being more lenient. What's the problem with Beis Shammai being more lenient? We have a rule that Beis Shammai is always more stringent than Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel is always chesed, and Beis Shammai is always gvura. And the Mishnah elsewhere, Rashi tells us in Masechta Idios, lists the only exceptions to this rule of when Beis Shammai is lenient. And this Mishnah is not on the list. Which means, in this instance, Beis Shammai too is being more strict than Beis Hillel. If he's being more strict, then his measure has to be smaller than Beis Hillel. But by you suggesting yesterday that Beis Hillel, when he says a mouthful, he actually only means a half a mouthful, meaning one cheek, you have now made Beis Hillel's amount to be smaller than Beis Shammai, at least for the ordinary mouth. Following? So on Malay, they responded to him and said, no. I pull up the next page. Sprint the wrong way. Sorry, I just got to pull the page on my... Okay, so on Malay, they told him, now top of pay Amud Beis, 80b, Ki Itchil, when was this question raised? Meaning, when did they ask, what is the size one needs to drink? What is the volume one needs to drink in order to be liable on Yom Kippur? They were asking, they were asking with respect to a person like Oig Melech HaBashan. That is the famous giant the last of the living giants named Og, whom Moshe defeated before they went to Eretz Yisrael, described in a few weeks ago in the Parsha. So in other words, when they were asking, how much do you have to drink in order to be liable, they were asking about an extreme case because they wanted to prove the point. Someone as big as that, how much does he have to drink? Because we know it comes down to when you are satisfied or when your mind is put at ease. So they went to the extreme case. The largest guy we can possibly find. How much does he have to drink in order to put his mind at ease, thus making him culpable for having drink on Yom Kippur? And that is where Beis Shammai says, Revi'is. And that is where Beis Hillel says, half a mouthful. Now for Og Melech HaBashan, for this giant, a half a mouthful is way bigger than a Revi'is. Which means if Og, assuming you were Jewish and assuming you were living today, were to drink a Revi'is of water on Yom Kippur, Beis Shammai would say he's liable. According to Beis Hillel, he hasn't drank a half a mouthful. He's not liable yet. And thus, Beis Hillel is being lenient. Even though it comes out that in our experience he's being stringent, but in the language of the Mishnah itself, he's not being stringent because the language of the Mishnah itself is applied specifically or is in the context of this large giant. And therefore, it doesn't make it to the list, even though technically speaking, the way we practice it, Beis Shammai is holding us culpable only after or later than Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says half mouthful. My half mouthful is left in the Revi'is. Following? But nonetheless, the Mishnah itself is not speaking of a leniency, speaking of a stringency because we're talking about such a large person. Yeah, I keep on saying size. I mean volume. I'm keeping it's volume. Okay, and therefore, because they're asking with respect to, because the discussion is with respect to the great giant Oik, therefore the Beis Shammai the Beis Shammai is the Chumrah. Because Beis Shammai is giving a smaller amount, he's giving a Revi'is, whereas Oig Melech HaBashan, Oig, the giant's half a mouthful is way bigger than a Revi'is. Okay. Maskef for Reb Zera raises the following objection. Again, the same word maskef, which means it's a question coming from a logical position, a challenge from a logical position rather than quoting any sources. And he asks as follows, why is it that when it comes to food, the volume one needs to eat of food in order to be liable is called chad b'chad b'kei. Each and every person, me, or a 13-year-old who became bar mitzvah 2 days ago, all have to eat only the size of a date in order to be liable. Universal standard. And why is this different? Shtia. When it comes to drinking on Yom Kippur, the chol chad b'chad b'didei, that each and every person becomes liable at drinking a measure that's subjective to his experience. Beis Shammai is the only one who gives a universal standard. He says Revi'is, but we don't follow the halacha like Beis Shammai. We follow Beis Hillel, which is a half a cheekful. Beis Hillel, according to interpretation, to keep it consistent with our Mishnah. But nonetheless, it's a subjective measure. And when it comes to food, it's a universal measure. So why is that? This is what Rabbi Zera asked. So Abaye responded to him, Kim luhu l'Rabbanon. The sages have it by, it could be by tradition or could be by estimation. Kimlu means they have established, or they have it as an establishment, as I guess is a more accurate way of translating these words. Kimlu l'Rabbanon. So the sages have it by their understanding, by tradition or by their estimation. I'm just thinking now, just occurred to me now, it's probably tradition, given the fact that we said before that all measures come from Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai. Right, we said that a few days ago, that all measures in the Torah are derived, are tradition passed down from Moshe Rabbeinu down to the sages. So then these must also be. The question is, what's the logic behind it? I don't know. I'm just thinking this out loud because I'm just thinking this, but maybe I'm wrong about this. Hashem told him. In other words, there are things that Hashem said in the Torah, those are words. Then there are rules Hashem gave to interpret. And then there are certain things that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu without any rules to interpret, just told him these are the facts. Like, for example, the fact that your tefillin straps are black. Hashem told it to Moshe Rabbeinu, finished. Not in the Torah, not derived from anything in the Torah. Because Hashem says, that's called halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's a law from Moshe Rabbeinu that he received at Sinai. And this is what we said about all the measures in Torah as well. So I imagine that applies here too. The question is just what the logic is. trying to think why this might be wrong. It just occurred to me now as I'm reading this. Okay, if anybody has some reason why this might be wrong, I'd be happy to hear. Okay, so Kimler Rabbanon, the sages have it. Let's just translate that way. That when a person eats the amount that's the size of a date to Bahachi, with that amount, mitzvah daita, his mind is put at ease. He isn't satisfied yet. As we learned a few days ago, satisfaction comes only at the size of an egg, which is why you're only responsible to do the grace after meals after eating the amount of an egg. But eating the size of a date sets your mind at ease. It's mahachi, eating anything less than the amount of a large date. Loy mitzvah daita, loy mitzvah. A person's mind is not set at ease. Universal standard. We explained this from the Rebbe's Sikha a while back, which I wanted to review before I came to this class today, but God willing, I'll do so before tomorrow's class. I'll give you more details. But the gist of the Sikha there is that when you're talking about restoring one's life, restoring one's energy, there's two versions of that. There is the essential energy of just being alive, and then there's the more individualized energy for each particular person in each particular part of the body that requires a different version of energy, a different type, a different amount, a different type. The arm needs one type of energy and the eye needs another. But then we're talking about not so much restoring the particularities of my lost energy, but just the very fact that I should feel more alive than, God forbid, the other way. That is universal standard for. Because there's universal standard to living. You're either alive or not alive. The type of life, the amount of energy, that's very different between each person. But a person who has low energy, or a person who has high energy, a newborn baby, or someone who's on death row, are equally alive, even if their type of life and their amount of energy is different. And if when we're talking about this essential type state of living, universal standard. But again, I'm going to look it up, God willing, later this afternoon, and we'll have some more on that tomorrow, because the Gemara is going to be analyzing this a bit more, especially as it relates to drink. And when it comes to drink, it's a hybrid of standardization, but not standardization, as we'll see. Okay, so when it comes to food, our sages have it that once you eat the amount of a date, the volume of a date, then your mind is set at ease. But b'shtia, when it comes to drinking, by his specific measure, mitzvah daita is how his mind is set at ease. His half a cheek. But b'techavre, the amount of water that his friend needs, lo mitzvah daita, his mind is not set at ease. So even though I have to look at the Rebbe's Sikha to see how this fits in here, how this exactly works, but even though it's a very minimal amount, it's not a massive amount, which means we're not talking about you feeling, like after you run a marathon and you gulp down 2 bottles of water, you feel great about yourself. It's not talking about that type of feeling good. It's also talking about just taking off the edge, which means you're talking about a very minimal restoration because you're drinking only half a cheekful, not a lot. But nonetheless, it's not universal in the exact same amount. Each person has their own minimal amount they need to take off the edge of their thirst. And that is a half a mouthful. So with liquid, it's subjective. When it comes to solids, foods, it is universal. Okay. So Reb Zeta continues to ask along the same lines. Maskif Reb Zeta challenges further. And every single human being in the world eats the amount the size of a date, and their mind is set at ease. And the giant, who is massive, is also set at ease with the size of a date. He's huge. How is he set at ease? So Abaye said to him, this is a conversation going back and forth between Zayd and Rabbi. Our sages have it that the bahachim mitzvah daiti, and when a person eats that amount, the amount the size of a date, his mind is set at ease. He no longer has the edge of hunger. But sir mahachi, less than that, loy mitzvah daiti, his mind is not set at ease. Miyu, however, kula alma, every person, tuva, feels, very well at ease. But we're talking about the giant, the king of Bashan, Purta, he feels less at ease, but he still feels at ease. In other words, the very fact that he ate something or put something in his stomach, he doesn't feel the pangs of hunger that much more. Just not as comfortably at ease as I would be, let's say. But both of us have gone from the pangs of hunger to no longer having the pangs of hunger. The only question is, how far away are we from pangs of hunger? Like, much farther away, me or Oig Melech HaBashan just got rid of it, just got rid of it. Nonetheless, the standard still remains universal, as this is the amount required to set my mind at ease. What's interesting is, and again, I'm going to look at the Rebbe Sikha to see more, but what's interesting is like this. If the Gemara is saying that Oig Melech HaBashan, his mind is set at ease a little less than I'm set at ease when he eats the same amount as me, then if I ate less than a date palm, would I be a little bit set at ease? Doesn't seem like it, because there's a universal standard. That's the minimum. That's the minimum threshold. The question is, when I hit the minimum threshold, how good do I feel about it? So this, I have to look at the Rebbe Sikha, but this further proves Rebbe's point. We're talking about an essential state of restoring your essential livingness. And the essential state of restoring your livingness is not different for anybody. It's always the same. The only question is, how good do you feel now that that your essential state of livingness has been restored? Because if the case is that it's a subjective experience, then how could you tell me that I'm eating the same much as Oig? I'm feeling better than he is. So let me eat less where I'm feeling as good as he's feeling now, and then I should be liable. That's not the case. Right. So exactly. So long as the edge is taken off, liable. Now it happens when I take the edge off, I feel better than when he takes the edge off, but we both take the edge off, and therefore